I have chosen to introduce this phenomenon of biblical prophets, Nevi'im, through the words of three different personalities. We will note the defining characteristics suggested by each. So I'm going to share by the end, you will also understand why the title. So let me read this excerpt to you. When silence threatens to take the power of decision out of our hands, one looks into history for the courage to speak even in an unpopular cause. Looming as ethical giants are those extraordinary of men, the Hebrew prophets. They did not believe that conscience is a still, small voice. They believed that conscience thunders or it does not speak at all. They were articulate, passionate, and fearless, attacking injustice and corruption, whether the guilty be kings or their own unrepentant people. Without physical protection, scornful of risks evoked by their unpopular messages, they went among the people with no shield other than truth. Today, we particularly need the Hebrew prophets because they taught that to love God was to love justice.
I called Lorraine, didn't answer.
That each human being
yesterday she moved in, right?
Has an inescapable obligation to denounce evil where he or she sees it and to defy a ruler who commands him to break the covenant. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because decent people must be imbued with the courage to speak the truth, to realize that silence may temporarily preserve status or security, but to live with a lie is a gross affront to God. Does anyone know who the author of this selection is? Don't raise your hand. Rhoda, are you raising your hand? No, okay. Anybody? I'll give you a clue. It was said in 1966.
I think it was Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Anyone else? I don't get to say no too often to Marlene. But you're not too far from the truth.
Martin Luther King.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent, Marlene. It was Martin Luther King addressing a conference of the Synagogue Council of America, which was an organization of the three, at that time, denominations. Another time, I'm going to give you a link to a beautiful rap done by some high school students with Martin Luther King and Heschel. and it's marvelous. So that's Martin Luther King. So please review for us, what are the characteristics that King, Alav HaShalom, mentions? Just look through it quickly and throw them out. What must a Navi be? What must he be concerned about? Just
Articulate,
articulate,
passionate,
Passionate.
fearless.
fearless.
Be willing to speak out.
Yes.
Okay.
What else?
Not afraid to go against the stream.
Absolutely. Is not afraid of being unpopular. Anything else? I think that you're missing
Courageous.
courageous. One more thing.
Ethics.
Ethical.
Ethics. And one
Ethical.
more thing. Ethical.
Whatever he does is tied to a belief in God.
Okay. Think
Love God.
of and love God. And by the way, you should hear in there that King is calling on not just official prophets, but says that each one of us really is meant to denounce evil if we see it. Okay, now, text number 2. And this is by Avram Yoshua Heschel. The Bible's aim is not to record history, but rather to record the encounter of the divine and the human on the level of concrete living. I'm going to read that again. The Bible's aim is not to record history, but rather to record the encounter of the divine and the human on the level of concrete living. That says so much. The prophetic spirit lives on in those who express a very deep love, a very powerful dissent, a painful rebuke with unwavering hope. The prophet's greatest contribution to humanity was the discovery of the evil of indifference. Few are guilty, all are responsible. The things that horrified the prophets are even now family occurrences all over the world. To us, a single act of injustice, cheating in business, for example, exploitation of the poor, is slight. To the prophet, a disaster. To us, injustice is injurious to the welfare of the people. To the prophet, it is a death blow to existence. To us, an episode. To them, a catastrophe, a threat to the world. Now, yes, Heschel, very similar to King, but what does he add to the words of King here? It was a quality that King had, for sure, but he doesn't refer to it explicitly here. I'll give you a moment.
All are responsible.
All are responsible, but I said earlier that I think that King also was saying that each of us also should be feeling that if we have to denounce evil, don't hesitate. I don't know, perhaps I didn't see it in King, but what does, in that first paragraph, does Heschel say a prophet must have? Besides the deep love, a very powerful dissent, he's just saying it in different words,
Unwavering hope.
unwavering hope. Now, we know that Martin Luther King so had hope because he dreamed. Now, let's take a look at our third. And he certainly refers to God in talking about the relationship between the divine and the human. And I love that on the level of concrete living. And we'll get back to that. Now, our third. And you can already anticipate what I will ask after we read from Erich Fromm, who, by the way, grew up in a very, very traditional Jewish home. He strayed from it, but he never lost his love of Tanakh. Never lost that, and read it till his last days and refers to it. Fromm asks, are the prophets still meaningful for anyone except practicing Christians and Jews? Shouldn't they be meaningful to everyone today? Should they become relevant for us again precisely because they are regarded as irrelevant? Again, should they become relevant for us again precisely because they are regarded as irrelevant? He continues, those who proclaim ideas and at the same time live them, we may call prophets. The Old Testament prophets proclaimed the idea that man had to find an answer to his existence. And this answer was the development of his reason, of his love. They taught that humility and justice were inseparably connected with love and reason. So while he read and wrote The Art of Loving, he had this in mind, and so many of his other books. While the prophets preach of otherworldly harmony, their messages are highly relevant to our human experience. Now, what does Fromm add to Heschel's and King's words? Perhaps it's understood, but
civility, respect for others' opinions, even though they differ from yours.
okay, he refers to people's relationships. I think the other two also, when they talk about justice, but I said perhaps not as explicitly as Fromm refers to it. And if, go ahead.
Sorry, it's just that the word humility keeps popping out at me for the whole 2 paragraphs. I don't remember seeing the word humility in the first 2. And
Okay, not explicitly, but as somebody who has been present over these last months, it would have been interesting if I would have begun by asking at the outset, what is a word that I have used repeatedly, whatever the topic, and it would be humility, because that is the essence of our relationships with other human beings and with God. And having said that, how is from, and this is why I particularly brought him into this three, how is he different from King and Heschel?
To me, it sounds like Heschel and King are talking about reactions to what they see in the world, and Fromm is talking about personal reason for existence and finding meaning in the world.
Yafeh, Hindi. We know Fromm's background, and certainly everything that he studies, he brings to his psychology and his psychotherapy. And he is concerned about that, certainly more about the individual. I hesitate to say that because I think the other two men were also concerned about the individual, but their concern was more on a national level, on a racial level. So I think you're very right. And missing from Fromm, there is no mention of God or the divine, not explicitly.
True. That's true.
Now, what Fromm also adds is, if the other two haven't said it explicitly, that these prophets mustn't merely proclaim ideas, but they must live them. Now, I know the other two men would agree, but I want to explain further why I brought these three people. I could have chosen others, but it's very, very difficult to talk about prophets and not include Abraham Joshua Heschel, his magnum opus, The Prophets. Three different individuals with, let's call it, three different religiosities, but all three are inspired by the words and the wisdom of our prophets. And most importantly, each, I believe, invites us today to take our place alongside these extraordinary yet human individuals. And friends, this is what prompted my choice of this topic. If ever there was a need, there is, for us to have one, I was about to say significant person, but we are all significant, but you know what I mean? Someone that will be able to do something in every corner of this world, because it is in every corner of the world, to stand up and tell people on all kinds of different levels. Yes, we've been talking about our disappointment in our leadership, wherever we are, and in citizens
On it.
ignoring
Here we are.
responsibilities.
Thank you. I'm listening now. Thank you.
And I know on our personal levels that we don't say, let it be. But when I asked in the beginning those two questions, I'm wondering, without joking now, do we see that it is our responsibility when we see someone doing something wrong to point it out? And not only do we think, but we actually act upon that. Or do we avoid it? Anybody want to answer that? My first comment would be, there are times that you do avoid it if you know or trust that you could endanger yourself. But put that aside, there are all different types of situations that each of us lives in that could call for what we've called in the past constructive criticism.
Yes, but Bracha,
Linda.
the danger is that when you become that critic, everybody relegates you. Oh, that person again. Oh, harping on this. And it becomes irrelevant because it's your comments just becomes superficial because they dismiss you because you're so. I think there's a danger in doing that too much.
Would anybody like to respond before I do?
I was just going to
Ellen.
add,
Yes.
in this day today of privacy, which is to the point of ridiculous.
A lot of pain. I told you to leave. I didn't get up.
In this day where the privacy issue has become so insidious in everything to the point where you know, I think it's a dangerous thing to start being an open critic, even though you might feel you want to be.
Okay, and I think that's why at least one or two of them refers to the Navi, the prophet, as being fearless.
Right.
And going back to what Linda said, when you decide that that's the path you're taking, you are signing up for a lonely life. Most prophets were loners. Now,
Yeah.
some lived far away from the communities that they were responsible for. Others were more part in a more personal way of their communities. But certainly, when somebody is going to be that critic, you have to know that you don't care how people perceive me. You only care about how they perceive you to the extent that you want them to listen to you. You know, you have to have a way to be able to speak and draw them in a positive way, But yes, of course, it's a very, very difficult thing. Now, as far as what you said about that, if you're the only one who is constantly criticizing this and then that and then that, I understand that people might get this idea, and people don't want to be around somebody that's always doing that. So it's not you, Linda, because I know you're around people all the time. No, it is a very difficult situation, for sure.
I have a question, Bracha.
Yes, Rhoda.
I think there has to be a prerequisite here that somebody who is judgmental or critical cannot be critical of someone else if their behavior is not absolutely almost perfect.
I agree with you 100%. And we know that there are, well, that's why Fromm mentions that. that if they're going to be critical, let's be sure that they are practicing what they're preaching, and not being hypocritical. And that is a bar that is very high. I'm sure we could go around the group here, and everybody could come up with a name of someone, whether on a personal level or whether a governmental level, who we know is hypocritical. But judging, you have to be very, very careful. You really do. And not do it too quickly, because sometimes you will, shortly after you put somebody down, you find out there was a reason for it. So you got to be careful. But there are some situations that it's just so obvious. Now, let's get back to my first question as an introduction to our first specific prophet today. We're going to begin with the second part of the Tanakh, Nevi'im, prophets, and we open during a very chaotic time in our people's history. They have entered Canaan, and there is no central authority. In that way, being in the desert was easier. There is no central authority. There certainly is not a king. And it's after Joshua's time, just to give you a sense, who took over after Moshe. And so the people who are the public figures are mostly judges and the Kohanim, the priests. So we open with that wonderful woman, Hannah. Now, when I say Hannah and refer to her as wonderful, I'm focusing on something that not everyone might know. So let me succinctly say what the situation is here as we open. Hannah was married for many, many years to Elkanah, and as so many, was barren. His other wife, Pnina, had children, and you can imagine how painful that was for her. Hannah finally has the guts, when they go to pray in Shiloh and give sacrifices, she goes and she decides, you know what? I am going to talk to God. And I want you to imagine a woman standing by herself, she's not heard, but Eli, the priest, sees her, and he's never seen something like this. And he assumes that she is under the influence of alcohol, because he's not hearing her say anything. It doesn't even occur to him. Why would it in those times that she is talking to God? But she is. And he feels terrible after. What does Hannah vow to God? Anyone? God, if you gift me with a child, I vow to you that I will consecrate him to living a life with you, totally devoted as a Navi, a prophet. I will keep him for the first bit to raise him and make sure he can be on his own. And then when he's 3 years old, I'll give him to you. She made that vow, and she kept that vow. Now, I have to tell you, obviously, when I was rereading the text, it occurred to me how many mothers and fathers would make that same vow, that it would be wonderful if my child would choose, Shirley, to be a Navi, to be a social critic. Would any of us, did any one of us think that when I posed that question earlier? Okay. So what's the name of Hannah's son? Samuel, Shmuel. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, the priest. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no frequent vision. I think the Hebrew is a little easier to understand than what's really being said in the English here. What it's saying is, why was the word of God so precious? Because Eli really didn't relate to him. Eli was a prophet, but he was a disappointment. He didn't have his priorities straight. You'll have to trust me on that. So there was no frequent vision. And it came to pass because God didn't feel that he could use Eli as a prophet. So he was in charge of the Mishkan, the altar, sacrifices, ritual. And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, now his eyes had begun to wax dim, that he could not see. And the lamp of God was not yet gone out, and Samuel was laid down to sleep in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. That the Lord called Samuel, and he said, Samuel, here am I, hineni. And he ran unto Eli and said, here am I, for thou didst call me. Shmuel didn't have in his head that God was speaking to him. He assumed that it was Eli. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lay down. And that's how distant Eli was from communicating with God, that it didn't even occur to him at this point that it was God speaking to Shmuel. And the Lord called yet again Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli. Notice this time he doesn't run. And said, here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived finally that the Lord was calling the child. Therefore, Eli said unto Samuel, go lie down, and it shall be, if thou be called, that thou shalt say, speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for thy servant heareth. So what is revealed to us about Samuel here? He is ready to serve. He says more than once, Hineni, here I am. At first, he runs because he's so devoted to being, whether it was God or whether it was Eli, serving. We learn as we continue of Shmuel's characteristics in the next few verses, more from what they say about Eli than Samuel. And I've already been critical of Eli. Okay. And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from the beginning even unto the end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity, in that he knew that his sons did bring a curse upon themselves, and he rebuked them not. Shmuel, that will be his job, to rebuke. And any parent, in an appropriate way, I think we believe, should rebuke, certainly for those things that deserve rebuking. And that sometimes is subjective, for sure. And therefore, I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated with sacrifice nor offering forever. And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel feared to tell Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he said, Here am I. Now tell me, what do we learn about Samuel just from that verse that says, and Samuel feared to tell Eli the vision, the conversation he had just had with God? What does that say? And it's a difficult position that a Navi, a prophet, can be in.
He has to tell his master the things that Hashem has told him, and they're negative things, and he feels uncomfortable having to, in a way, rebuke it. Eli.
Okay.
You know,
Thank you, Bev. I don't know that I would call him master, but certainly we have a sense, that Eli was the elder, and he feels badly that he's now, this little kid is going to be the one to rebuke him. Now, what's the tension? And this happens from time to time. The tension between a prophet having to be objective while still being a human being, which might mean that he has subjective feelings. And that is very, very difficult. As a representative of God, he has to be objective. But that doesn't mean that as a human being, he doesn't have feelings, as Bev said, for Eli. And he said, What is the thing that he hath spoken unto you? Eli asks. I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he spoke unto thee. And Samuel told him all the words and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and didn't let none of his words fall to the ground. So what is the strength here? Unlike with Eli, the Lord was with Samuel, and Samuel did always as God's words told him to do. Going on in verse 20, and all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. That's a very, very important occurrence, that they grew immediately to trust Shmuel. It might not be that they're always going to follow him, but to begin with, they trust Samuel. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord.
You forgot, didn't you? Fine.
And what you have here is already more of a presence of God in communicating, because he has somebody he trusts, Shmuel, Samuel. Now, let's continue to see the strengths of Shmuel. So this is a time when there are many battles going on, mostly between Bnei Israel, the Israelites, and the Philistines. And in one battle, they take the ark. And as we open here, they have returned it. They have gotten it back. And the men of Kiryat Yearim came and fetched up the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab in the hill and sanctified Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. And it came to pass from the day that the ark abode in Kiryat Yearim that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel yearned after the Lord. So if 20 years ago, when Shmuel started, they were scattered, and as I said, chaotic, and they were worshiping idols, in this time, Shmuel has succeeded in bringing the people back to the Lord. And Samuel spoke unto all the house of Israel, saying, if you do return unto the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. Then the children of Israel did put away the Baalim and the Ashtaroth, various idols, and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray for you unto the Lord. And they gathered together at Mizpah, and drew water and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel in Mizpah. Now, I'm going to skip down to verse 15. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And he went from year to year in circuit to Beit El and Gilgal and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all those places. Which brings us back to what I said earlier. This was a prophet that was amongst the people, constantly traveling amongst them. And his return was to Ramah, which today is Ramallah, for there was his house, and there he judged Israel, and he built there an altar unto the Lord. Now, we're going to have a crisis here, and we will see Shmuel in action. And it came to pass when Shmuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Yoel, and the name of his second, Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel into Ramah. And they said unto him, Behold, you are old, and your sons walk not in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. We know this. I said there was no central authority, certainly not a king. Well, can we blame the Israelites for wanting it? We know what the problem was, and we'll see what Samuel tells them. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto you, for they have not rejected you. Because God had a sense that Samuel, as a human being, felt rejected. But they have rejected me, that I should not be king over them. That's the problem, that a human being, a king, will become the king. And it's very hard. As Lord Acton said, what was that? People in power corrupt. I don't want to ruin it. I'll think of it. According, the more power you have, the more corrupt you tend to become. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto you. Now therefore, hearken unto their voice, howbeit thou shalt earnestly forewarn them, and shalt declare unto them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. God is saying, okay, Samuel, they want it, let them have it, but tell them what it's going to be like. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. So, what does he say? This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them unto him for his chariots and to be his horsemen, and they shall run before the chariots. And he will appoint them unto him for captains of thousands and captains of 50s, and to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his instruments of war and the instruments of his chariots, etc., etc. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and to be cooks and to be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed, etc., 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 etc. I want to be sure that we get to a couple of things. And how do they react? The people refused to hearken unto the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now, how could a Navi, who we believe, and God loves the people who are his responsibility, how can he not understand when I just said a few minutes earlier that they're in constant battles? Don't they have a right to have somebody who's going to lead them in battle? So there again, Samuel was deadly opposed to monarchy. But if God says so, then he's got to go along with it. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he spoke them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to him, Hearken unto their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man unto his city. Now, what's going to happen here? Samuel said unto all Israel, the former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, Ishmar Shorsh, when discussing this, said, wouldn't it be interesting and wonderful if every leader, when he's saying goodbye, does what Samuel does here? if they knew that they had to do what he's about to, would perhaps their time in office be different? And Samuel said unto all Israel, behold, I have hearkened unto your voice in all that you said unto me, and have made a king over you. And now behold, the king walketh before you, and I am old and gray-headed, and behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth unto this day. Here I am, listen carefully, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Have I taken anything from you? Or whose ass have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Or whom have I oppressed? Or of whose hand have I taken a ransom to blind mine eyes therewith? And I restore it to you. And they said, thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. That is something that not too many, even our leaders, even then, would be able to say about themselves. So imagine if people today had to say that as a closing ceremony before they were allowed to leave their position. Now, Shmuel, getting back to that tension that a Navi has. Shaul was, it's funny, it's left there without knowing exactly how old he was when he began to reign. And 2 years he reigned over Israel. Don't pay attention to chronology when we're talking Bible. And Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel. They're about to fight the Amaleks. And Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 men were with Saul in Michmash and the Mount of Bethel. 1,000 were with Jonathan and Givat Benjamin, and the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the horn throughout all the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, etc., etc. And they're all gathered there, and I'm skipping again. And we see that Shaul was meant to wait for Samuel to arrive so that in every battle, the Navi or a priest would give a sacrifice, and that would give them strength to move to victory. So time is going by, and the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed. Then the people did hide themselves in caves, afraid of the enemy, and in thickets and in rocks and in holes and in pits. Now some of the Hebrews had gone over to the Jordan, to the land of Gad and Gilead, but as for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. And he tarried 7 days, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So what does Saul do? Bring hither to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. What do you think, people, of what Saul did? Was he wrong? Was he right? Do you understand? Are you sympathetic? How do you think Shmuel, Samuel will react when he finally gets there? Well, and it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him that he might salute him. And Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines assembled themselves together at Michmash. Therefore, said I have to do this. Now, people, what do you think of that? Because if we look at Pasuk 13, Samuel said to Shaul, thou hast done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now would the Lord have established the kingdom upon Israel forever. You would have had it, but not anymore. Not anymore. What is the second time that Shaul makes a mistake and is insubordinate? With the Amalekites again, when he's told to wipe out all of them, but he leaves Agag. He leaves Agag. Another time that he is insubordinate. Now, I bring this not so much to talk about Shaul, but Samuel. Samuel and the position that a Navi, and we'll see this in the coming weeks, that a Navi is in a difficult position because he is both a messenger of God, a representative of God, but he is also a human being who comes to relate and to come to even love Shaul. And he was against having a king to begin with. And when he sees that he has to tell Shaul that you are no longer going to have this in your family, well, in 11, and it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. I'd like us to look at one more set of psukim. In Samuel. Nathan. So I want to insert, as we come close to ending, some prophet training into our session. For in fact, I said that I believe we are all meant to act as children of prophets, B'nai Nevi'im. And I'm going to use a particular case that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Samuel had a disciple who becomes a Navi, Natan. And I'd like us to explore Natan's rebuking style. Now, the necessary background for this is that wild story. There are many words to describe this story. When David, precious King David, spots the beautiful woman sunbathing on her roof, Bathsheba, and calls her over and sleeps with her. And he does all this while her husband Uriah is off in battle commanding. What happens? She becomes pregnant. So what does our precious King David do? Anybody?
He puts her husband in the front
killed.
line.
He has him killed. And he has to do it, make an attempt more than once. He calls him home, wants it to appear that he is the father of that child. Okay? I know for some in the past I've ruined King David, but at another time we will talk about King David. Nobody is perfect. This is the David that we sing about. David, Melch Yisrael, Chai v'Kayam. So now pay attention to Natan's style. Yeah. And the Lord sent Natan unto David, and he came unto him and said unto him, there were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing save one little lamb, which he had bought and reared. And it grew up together with him. And with his children it did eat of his own morsel, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and it was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him. but took the poor man's lamb and dressed it for the man that was to come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Natan, as the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this deserveth to die. And he shall restore, on top of that, the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And Natan said to David, thou art that man. Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul, and I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that were too little, then would I add unto thee so much more. Wherefore hast thou despised the word of the Lord to do that which is evil in my sight? Uriah the Hittite thou hast smitten with the sword, and his wife you have taken to be your wife, and you hast slain with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore, David, the sword shall never depart from your house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of thine own house, and I will take your wives before thine eyes and give them unto your neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun, for thou didst it secretly. But I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. And David said unto Natan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Natan said unto David, the Lord also hath put away your sin. You shall not die. Now tell me, why a parable? That was Natan's choice of discussing this horrific behavior on David's part. Marlene?
I think it had a greater effect. The lesson was there before David's eyes, and he actually pronounced his own judgment. And then Natan reiterated what David had already said should happen to himself.
Yeah. It was easier to listen to something that maybe he didn't feel directly to begin with related to him. And as Marlene said, David now couldn't change his mind. He had already condemned this rich man. Now, what message was Natan giving David, the king, which is very important, significant, by the way, that you see that no one was beyond the law in those days. And even sometimes in these days, we have such leaders in jail. But what is the message? It isn't just that you are guilty, David, of sending someone to his death, but you of all people don't appreciate all the gifts that God has given you. Now, tell me, do you not at all question, does David really not understand that it was him in the story? Does he really not understand that it's him that Natan is talking about? Psychologists have said, oh yes, he knew it was him, but he had repressed what he had done so deeply that he really did get the severity of his crime. Because one could say, we're talking here about a lamb. David got it. David got it. So over the next week, I would like you to use this style of Natan's when you rebuke somebody and report back to us. I want to close with one more paragraph because it becomes an interesting dynamic. And we can put this in the context of the tension between our ritual leaders and our political leaders. And somewhere in between is the Navi. Eli and other Kohanim were in charge of sacrifices. And we have people today who are in charge of services and prayers. And we have politicians. That Navi is really meant to talk to both parties. And what's the difference, though, according to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Alav Shalom, who had been the Rosh Yeshiva in Etzion? This conflict between the Kohen, the priest, and the Navi stems from a fundamental difference in their roles. The Kohen's role is to guard the rituals fastidiously, and that is necessary to perform the avodah, the service according to a given rule book. The guiding principle of his service is routine and regularity, loyalty to the system and its proper functioning. In contrast, the prophet's primary role is to bring down fiery new messages from above. His goal is to induce change. He is a vibrant character, infusing spiritual meaning into people's lives and new vitality into their divine service. Due to the differences between these roles,
Doesn't have to be pleasure.
understandable that there has been so much conflict between their respective representatives. We pray that someone will see the light. And I thank you for staying with me a little longer than usual. If anybody would like to share anything about any of this? If not, remember, I will be asking you what prophetic thing you have done over the following week. Please stay well. It's always wonderful seeing you.